videos I'm doing on, let's see, on greetings and kind of stuff, right? So, but I want to just talk about the French and the I think I've mentioned this before in one of my previous videos, but I think I want to deep dive into it a little more here. The necessity to for the French to have to say bonjour or bonsoir or bon après-midi. Actually, bonjour, bonsoir. You have to say it. And I've been seeing this more and more and more and more. As I've been, thinking about it. This all goes back to a lot of pragmatics classes that I took in linguistics back in the 1990s, and with Catherine Orchioni, who taught us speech acts, right, in France, and we're talking about the whole thing of needing to have this phatic, Phatic, which is greetings, that doesn't really have any value other than establishing communication. And it's really interesting to see as I watch in shops in any place that any French person will come to, even here I'm doing this now, with the stable here, and taking some friends over to the kids, ride the horses and stuff. And just watching the people come in, they always say bonjour. They have to say it. And it's really interesting to see that because for Anglo-Saxon cultures, we don't have this necessity, right? We don't have this obligation when you come into a shop or come into a store, come to whatever or stable, to have to say hello. I mean, and if it's your business and there's something and we have to do it, then you'll start having a conversation. There's not this obligation to have to say the word bonjour or bonsoir. You don't have to. Now that comes down to education and other things and politeness, but that comes to a historical thing, the history of like Anglo-Saxon culture, especially the Americas, right? So, which was from immigrant cultures, a lot of industrial revolution, necessity, minimum communication, survival. That's different than England, right? That was had been established for a lot longer, for centuries before, whereas 50 to 15 centuries or more for basically the Americas to become having some of these immigrants, and so the history of some of the North America of the Americas. I'm talking about the Indian populations. I'm talking about the immigrants, right, and all mixing together. That there was it was a whole situation, a context of minimal communication. Sometimes you could kind of vehicle languages or varieties or something. It's minimal communication to survive. It's a real survival of the fittest, and you're not going to spend a lot of time having theoretical debates and stuff, right? Philosophical debates, which continental Europe had been around for a long time. People had been there and had already had plenty of literature, lots of stuff and protocol of you've got to do it this way, do it that way with royalty, right? So all this comes into play. I think it's a whole historical, cultural thing, not just pure linguistics. So bringing it down today is we're in 2022, and it's really interesting to see that it's necessary when coming a restaurant. People who come to restaurants don't even know each other and have to say hello to everybody, right? Or at least say hello, whoever is within hearing range, right? That's kind of the key thing. And what I say is that whole thing really is key here to understand that when these cultures come into conflict, I mean, I dealt with this in my first years, even with my mother-in-law, who's French. Not saying hello every morning or bonjour every morning. When she was coming downstairs, when she happens to be staying with us, it's an offense, right? A major offense. And I've been talking to a lot of colleagues about this. Just talking about analyzing it while we're talking over coffee breaks and lunch breaks and stuff. And it's what's important is that it's so important for the culture that if you don't do it, you're not. Sorry, I got a little tractor off starting in the background. I hope it's not going to be too loud. I'm going to talk a little bit louder here. I don't know if they're going to hear. I'm just going to back up here and get over farther away from it. But what's really, I think it's really important to see from that is that the culture that has this protocol set in place um, thinks that that's the thing you must do and always do. It's an educational thing. It's kind of considered to be educational. And if you don't do it, then you're not educated, right? Which it might not be. It just comes from a different culture where it's not that is not a protocol. And I think that's where I think that's where I really see, and I think I mentioned in the video where I was working in an office 2004-ish, 2003 or 4, and I had my English boss, I had an American colleague, and I had another colleague in the office and me, and it just everyone came to the office and said nothing until like 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm serious, 11 o'clock in the morning. Someone says, "Hey, Paul," or something. "Do you have the file I need?" And then all the discussion starts happening, right? There was no hello, no nothing. And it just made me really think at that moment on. That was my serendipity moment of understanding the differences in greetings. I mean, I already knew about it, but it wasn't so obvious that it really was true until that day. And now it's pretty much more obvious that I can see it all the time here. Especially, I've been, visiting a lot of places, seeing a lot of different shops, a lot of different places in different cities, and in France, and then it was in Germany, and I went to Switzerland too. And it's kind of really interesting to see. And across France, whatever shop you go to, it doesn't matter. You've got to say bonjour, right? And you go into a lift or an elevator, you got to say bonjour because it's a closed space. There is this whole notion of entering the territory of the other, or even actually if you're walking across an area where people are eating, right, at work, and they're all eating, but you gotta say bon appetit. You gotta say something. You've got to say these key words, right? That indicates that you are bothering them or that you're entering their space. And I think this all comes into a play of kinesics, of the distance, right, of people. And where you're entering another space, you have to acknowledge you're in their space. Whereas it all depends on what your culture establishes the space to be. And I'm pretty sure that for our Anglo-Saxons, and I'm here just making hypotheses, right? Because our distance is further away, we don't have, if we're walking by, I'm walking across here, a picnic table right here, those people are not in my space, right? And I'm not in their space. So I walk by, nothing. But see, in France, because of these Mediterranean cultures, European Mediterranean cultures, you've entered their space, right? And so you've got to do something. You've got to you've got to establish that communication. It's a necessary thing. So I think this is really something to look into. I want to look up some more things, see if what research has been done on this by academics and people involved a lot in speech acts, pragmatics, praxis stuff. I mean, all these things, right? Just to see at what point this distance factor has been taken account of different cultures, and what happens when you have interaction among different cultures, and how that negotiation happens. I mean, the negotiation of communication and how people adapt to it or not. I mean, and you can hear this. I can see this in a lot of expat groups. I've seen in France. People saying they don't understand why I have to say this all the time, and they always say you gotta say bonjour, and they struggle with more of what's the difference between bonjour and bonne journée, right? Or what's bonsoir and bonsoir. They focus on what's the difference of that, but it all comes from this necessity to have to say these words. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying it's culturally prevalent and relevant and necessary. And in some other cultures, it's not. And so it's something really, I'd be really interested to hear from Anglo-Saxons of different cultures. Folks from New Zealand, folks from Australia, folks from Jamaica, Barbados, India, the Americas. How do you interpret the necessity to say hello? As you're coming into a place to establish that communication. Are there certain contexts we have to say it, and others it doesn't really matter? And here again, I don't want to get into just the pure politeness aspect, okay? Because sometimes there's a politeness factor that is on top of it, right? What I'm saying is, at what point do you have to say it, right? And what are the places where it's okay if you're not said it doesn't matter? And do you feel that there's this distance thing, or there's this territorial thing that you're entering a territory? At what point do you have to say it and not? It'd be really good to hear what just common people, people think about it, and then we'll get some researchers here to be able to tag some of our people really involved that really go into this. You got to touch on this. It's more in the speech acts. It's more in the sociolinguistics. It could touch on it, right? But it's going to touch more on people that are going to discourse analysis, right? Because greetings fit into that. So I'll try to tag a few people that might be involved in that and see to get their opinions on it. Again, I'm not saying this is hard and fast rule. I'm just trying to establish what it is before I go doing a lot more research into it. But I'm kind of doing on some just empirical evidence and just kind of establishing what it is. So let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we'll deal with it. Okay? Take care. Bye.